In this video, I'm going to talk about the neuroscience of creativity, and I'm going to introduce you to the work of Vincent Walsh, who is a professor of human brain research at University College London. Now, before I go into this, disclaimer, I'm not an expert. Actually, I don't class myself as an expert in anything, but particularly not neuroscience. But I have learnt a little bit of information about this, which I've found incredibly interesting and useful. And so I'm going to present that to you in the way that I've understood it. So another thing to say, how I also like to frame any discussion on neuroscience is a basic understanding of what we're dealing with here. Now we have this cauliflower type structure, organ inside our head, our brain. And this brain consists of around 100 billion neurons or nerve cells, and so many connections that if you were to count one per second, it would take you more than 3 million years to complete the counting. Now just think about the magnitude of what's going on inside our heads at any time. So brain research can be really likened to, searching the exploration of our outer galaxies or the depths of our oceans, but it's actually only probably in the last 25 years or so that we've actually had the technology to look inside a healthy human brain to work out what's going on. And brain research is currently fairly limited to what can be easily replicated in laboratory conditions. So what they can easily replicate in a lab, they can really understand what's going on. So if you think about that for a minute, a process like meditation or mindfulness, that can be easily replicated in lab conditions. So there's a lot of research into those aspects, and I'm going to talk about those in later videos. But something like creativity, how do they replicate that in a lab? The process of creativity, where do we get our ideas from, that kind of stuff. It's such a big topic that it's very difficult to understand by these methods. So I'm going to link below a link to a TED talk by Vincent Walsh, which was delivered in 2011. 2011, yeah, this TED talk delivered in 2011, where he talks about the neuroscience of creativity, and you can see how they approached replicating aspects of creativity in the lab so that they could research it. So having said all of that, it's really good to understand the limitations of what we're working with here. There's so much we don't know about the brain and what goes on. The neuroscience research is fairly limited. So as I said, any discussion on neuroscience is good to kind of frame it with that understanding, so you know that anything I say from here doesn't come from an expert opinion. And also there's so much we don't know, so there's still so much to learn. But having said that, how I find neuroscience really helpful is in the subjective understanding of it. And as you talk about it, as I'm going to talk a bit more about it and what I've learned, and as we understand it, you'll realise that it just seems to make so much sense. When you talk about the networks in the brain and what's happening, it does make a lot of sense, and it's very practical actually to work with. So I'm just going to present a little bit of that to you here. We're looking at creativity. Now the reason I'm referencing Vincent Walsh is that I went to a day on neuroscience last year in London, and I heard him do a presentation on neuroscience of creativity. And I don't have a video of that presentation that day, which is a shame. I don't think it was recorded. He was swearing quite a lot, so I don't know if that's anything to do with it, but anyway. It was a fantastic presentation. I learned a lot from it and found it really helpful. So it was very similar to the presentation that he delivered in his TED talk in 2011, but I think maybe stuff's moved on a little bit since then. But yeah, it was a similar talk. So yeah, my favourite slide of the whole day, it was a whole day on neuroscience. He did one talk on it, and my favourite slide of the whole day is where he put up a slide and it said, "Do nothing more often." And I obviously really like this concept of creativity. I'm going to talk about why he said that in a minute, but it really relates to my message about being less busy, connecting with ourselves, understanding more what's going on. And I really believe this is a really important, I found it a really important aspect of getting in touch with my creativity, being less busy and doing nothing more often. So I'll come back to that. Now, in his TED Talk, you'll see he talks about these 4 processes of creativity. The preparation stage. And what he talks about in the preparation stage is becoming a bit obsessed about the subject that we're interested in. And I think this is something I do quite well, becoming quite obsessed with things. And you'll find what happens when you become passionate about something. It's good, you know, it's really good. It kind of takes our attention, and it's good to get a little bit obsessed about it. So what happens is when you become passionate and obsessed about something is you constantly go around and be adding bits of information to whatever it is your current obsession. So you'll be as you're going through the day, you might hear something on the radio or read something, or see a video, whatever, and it will add to these bits of information. So what he says in the video, I love this concept, is you're constantly refreshing the background activity. So this is the preparation stage of creativity. Now the second stage, do have some notes here, the second stage is the incubation stage. Now this is where he talks about doing nothing. So the incubation stage is where we start to make all these connections. So preparation stage, we're taking in information. The incubation stage, we start to make connections. Now sleep is really important for this. But also when he talks about doing nothing, it's like what we're doing here is we're employing the network in our brain that is relevant to making these connections. Now, in the TED Talk I'm going to link, he doesn't talk about the networks in the brain, but he did talk about the networks in the brain in the talk I heard in London. And this is how I understand the operations of the brain around meditation, mindfulness, and also this creativity and learning aspect. So the network in the brain that we're employing, when we need to employ when this incubation stage, is called the default mode network. Now this is the network that is employed when we're mind wandering. And you may relate to it like this. So you're doing a crossword or you're trying to work something out. He uses this example in his talk, but you're trying to work something out. You've got a problem in front of you and you're putting all your attention on this problem. You're thinking, I know the answer to this, but it just doesn't come. And then what happens is you put it to one side and then you go off and you go for a walk or have a shower or something like that. And then the information comes to you just like that. And the reason for that is because when you're kind of concentrating on a problem, you're not using the correct network in your brain to access that information. The correct network of the brain you need to access is the default mode network. And so that's what's coming to you. So it's that mind-wandering state is the default mode network, and it's like when you're doing nothing, that is what kicks in. So this is the network you would need to employ, and this is why it's doing nothing and resting, because that's the network that's coming in. Now the third stage of the creative process is the illumination. So that's the aha moment. So you've done the preparation, you've made the connections, and then the aha stage comes along. And then he's talking about the fourth stage, which is the verification stage. And that's where we start to test out our ideas and see have they impact, are they useful, or are they valuable, all that kind of stuff. But the bit I want to really focus on here is that incubation stage and that default mode network. Now, I've got a bit of a theory about this default mode network, and it fits very well with my whole concept here and what I'm talking about. Now, my theory is this, that default mode network is, when we're not dealing with the shit in our lives, it's not a nice, pleasant place to be. Because when we're there, we're not really thinking about the present, we're thinking about the past, we're thinking about the future, we're thinking about the stories of our lives. I've heard it called somewhere else. We're thinking about other people, we're thinking about other situations, and it can be where all the fears and anxieties start to surface, and it can be where we really get in touch with that sense of dissatisfaction. Now, it's not a pleasant place to be, and as I said, if you're not dealing with the shit in your lives, then we don't want to kind of sit in our default mode network, if you like. We don't want to be with it. So that's why we're often finding excuses. I mean, you know, I really believe this is my experience in the past, finding excuses just to be busy all the time. So I'm not thinking about stuff. I'm not having to kind of really make those connections, because those connections were not nice connections to make. So this is my theory about why we're so busy and why we're escaping, and why it's really important to connect with that dissatisfaction and become a bit more comfortable with that and a bit more willing to do something about it. So I think a really key aspect of this is to become a bit more comfortable with being in that mind-wandering aspect. And when we talk about doing nothing, I think it's quite important to define what that nothing is. Now, doing nothing is not sitting looking at your phone, clicking through your phone for your Facebook or your social media accounts. It's not watching YouTube. Doing nothing is really shutting off from all of that. A great way to connect with the default mode network is to go and have a walk. There's also another aspect about how we're using our vision, and this has come from another neuroscientist I follow, that how we use our vision and having the panoramic vision and looking up and looking around and having that kind of soft gaze is really good for our brain. So I'm going to come to talk about that a bit later on. But yeah, so so bear in mind, doing nothing is not kind of really focusing on those kind of escape. Doing nothing is not an excuse to escape. So doing nothing is like going for a walk. Meditation really is good. And as I said, I'm going to come on to talk about meditation quite a lot more, but actually meditation is actively not trying to involve the default mode network. Meditation is good for creativity, but meditation is not trying to employ the default mode networks. It's about getting away from that. But actually, there's meditation, and what we know about the neuroscience of meditation and the results from that. There has been some proof about how we can effectively rewire this default mode network in our brain, so it becomes a better place to be. So I'm going to come and talk about that in later videos. So there you go, there's a bit of introduction to the neuroscience of creativity as I understand it and as I found helpful. Do watch that video from Vincent Walsh. The best way, if you want to connect with Vincent Walsh, the best way to do that is on Twitter. He's at Vin Walsh, VINWALSH. He has another kind of self-appointed mission in life, which is calling out bullshitters. So if he does get to see this video and he doesn't like what I've got to say, I'm sure he'll have something to say about it. So in my next video, I'm going to introduce somebody else who's inspired me, and this is from the field of yoga philosophy. So I hope you will join me for that.